Joining us now on the John Fredericks Radio Network, America's Sheriff, Sheriff David Clarke. He's also Senior Advisor to WeBuildTheWall.us. Sheriff Clarke, great to have you.
Great to be on with you, John, and hello once again to your great listeners.
So, Sheriff, you were right. I was wrong. You said last week we had a little debate on universal background checks, and I said the president was going to really jawbone and push forth bipartisan legislation to get universal background checks finally done. And you said to me, nope, he's not going to do it eventually. He's going to find out that his base isn't going to allow it, and he can't get any Republicans to back it, and he's going to abandon it. And according to news reports yesterday, he had a conversation with Wayne LaPierre of the NRA, and apparently the president has decided to scrap that. To give you an example, after speaking with LaPierre, who's the CEO of the NRA, National Rifle Association, the president said that he was not going to go forward with really pursuing, at this time, universal background checks. So, I was wrong and you were right.
Well, I don't think it's a matter of you were wrong and I was right. I think it's having a feel for this president, which you have a great ability to do. You know, whenever a tragic situation occurs throughout the country, the president is expected to calm the waters and calm the nation. And while everybody else is running around like chickens with their heads cut off, you know, he's expected to say responsible things. And so, you know, it's thrown out there, hey, we need this, hey, we need that. But the problem that I have with this, you know, so-called universal, because there's nothing universal about it, it's just a neat-sounding name, is that this stuff is being proposed, these anti-gun laws are being proposed by radicals. This is a radical anti-gun movement. So once the nation calms down, people get their wits about them. Usually when a poll is taken, it goes back heavily in favor of people not wanting more restrictions on the Second Amendment. That's been the normal trajectory of this thing. So that's what I based it on. That, you know, after a while, I mean, it's a big part of his platform to protect the Second Amendment. I don't think he's going to abandon that. I think it would hurt him politically, just to appease this radical anti-gun movement. So, you know, I mean, it's a big swing and a miss anyway, the stuff that's being proposed, red flag laws, universal background checks. None of that is going to stop these mass shootings. And I'll admit, I don't have the answer. You know, we hear certain things on mental health. We hear guns in the hands of people who shouldn't have them. We hear about, you know, magazine capacity, so on and so forth. But it's a big swing and a miss. And I think that if we do anything, it shouldn't have an effect of giving the government more power and fewer rights for the individual, because we did that after 9/11 in this hastily bill that was put together, you know, that was supposed to stop terrorism, and actually all it did was allow things like this government spying on American citizens without a warrant, that sort of thing. So, you know, now that cooler heads are prevailing, you know, I think the president just kind of signaling, I mean, we didn't hear it from him, but like you said, it was a news report, but he's signaling to his base that, you know, he's still on solid footing as it relates to the Second Amendment.
Well, look, if the president doesn't get behind this the way he said he was going to do it, and get a coalition together, have meetings at the White House and jawbone it, it just is not going to get done. It's simple as that. So maybe he's in favor of it, but, you know, he decided now might not be the time. But without the president's leadership on either red flag laws or universal background checks, look, everybody goes back to their respective rabbit holes, their respective trenches, and nothing happens. So that's kind of where we are now. It looked like President Trump was serious about going forward, but I don't think he's going to do it now. And if leaving it to Republicans in Congress, he isn't going to get anything done. I want to shift gears. President Trump said yesterday in kind of a wide-ranging press conference, Sheriff Clarke, that any Jewish person who votes for a Democrat is guilty of ignorance or great disloyalty. And this stemming, of course, from the Squad. And I don't know if you saw, we we covered this in depth. I was shocked by the press conference on Monday, I think, by the two squad members, Ilhan Omar and Rashida Tlaib. And Tlaib started crying in the press conference about the Palestinian people not visiting her grandmother. The president said he thought that was disingenuous, etc. But never in my lifetime, ever. I mean, I grew up in New York and New Jersey, large Jewish communities, and Jews have been voting Democrat when I grew up almost in a lockstep, like 90%. I mean, I was probably in my 30s before I knew I had a Jewish friend of mine that even thought about voting for a Republican, right? So that's the environment I grew up in. Jews voted Democrat down the line. That's kind of what they did. Now you got these two representatives going on TV. I mean, blasting the Jews, anti-Semites, blasting Israel, calling for an end to aid to Israel until Israel meets their demands, which are a separate state for Palestine. And now the president calls them out and says, look, if you're a Jewish voter and you believe in Israel, how could you possibly vote for these people? What is your response to this?
I think it's great. He raises an interesting dynamic in terms of voting behavior. Everything that you said is factually correct, but we ask the same thing. I ask the same. When I say we, I'll take responsibility for it. I ask the same thing about black voters. How can they vote monolithically and, in the 90% range, vote for Democrats when the Democrats have done nothing for them? The Democrats have basically destroyed the black family unit over years with the creation of the welfare state. The Democrat Party was the ones that were responsible for slavery. They upheld that institution. The Democrat Party fought against the Civil Rights Act. They fought against the Voting Rights Act. So you put all that together, and I could say the same thing I have about black voting behavior. So, and it's an interesting dynamic, and it's something that needs to be asked. But people are afraid. They walk around on eggshells when they want to talk about these, or when we need to talk about these sort of things. They're afraid. This president has shown once again that he's not afraid to do that. I think people can vote however they want. I never tell people, hey, you need to vote Republican. What I tell them to do is do some independent work, figure out why you want to make that decision, and then go ahead and make the decision, but be able to explain, not to me, but explain to yourself why you're doing it instead of just, well, this is the way we always vote. Well, this is the way they tell me to vote. So like I said, I think it raises an interesting dynamic. The Democrat Party has increasingly become anti-Semitic. The Democrat Party, I don't hear anybody stand up and condemn these two numbskulls, Tlaib and Ilhan Omar, for their vile statements that they've made. I have not heard one. As a matter of fact, Nancy Pelosi, when she was asked to comment on it some time ago, made up an excuse. Well, Ilhan Omar is new and she really doesn't really know and understand. She made up an excuse instead of saying, that was disgusting what she said, and that's what Pelosi should have said. That was disgusting, and it doesn't represent our party. So they make excuses for these individuals, and that's why I made the statement, and I just did, that the Democrat Party is becoming increasingly anti-Semitic.
Well, totally. And it's incredible to me, and you hit the nail on the head, Sheriff Clarke, right there, is where is the Democratic Leadership Party condemnation? Can you imagine, Sheriff Clarke, if two Republican congressmen, regardless of what their religious affiliation were or their nationality was, got up on TV and did a press conference and blasted the state of Israel, blasted Netanyahu, blasted their policies, called for the elimination of aid, boycotted the country, told people not to go there, to hurt them economically, don't do tourism. Could you imagine what the backlash would be to these two Republicans? I mean, the lying fake news legacy media would go absolutely crazy. CNN would be going berserk. MSNBC, ABC, NBC. You couldn't turn the TV on without these people getting blasted, and they'd be called to resign, censor, get out. Yet two Democrats do them, and what happens? Not a peep out of anybody. No Schumer.
Crickets.
No Pelosi. Nothing. Not a peep. Steny Hoyer, where the hell's he? Not a word. Are they afraid of these two people?
And sure, of all people who I believe is Jewish, to stand there silent is, I think, a slap in the face to everything about Israel. I've been into Israel twice now in the last 5 years or so, and I've taken a tour of the entire country, learned about the history, learned about the people, and what they've suffered, over the centuries. And when you actually go over there and you walk where some of these things have happened, and you go to that Holocaust museum, and it really leaves a mark on you in terms of what the state of Israel means, not just in terms of the history of the world, but also in terms of foreign relations. That's the only friendly country to the United States in the Middle East. If it weren't for Israel, there'd be nobody. So it's strategically, it's important as well. And so when people like these ignoramuses, Tlaib and Omar, make statements to the effect of, when it comes to Israel and voting in Congress, it's all about the Benjamins. I mean, that's disgusting to say something like that. And like you said,
Right.
Nobody's made to, the liberal media doesn't run to every prominent Democrat and say, do you condemn this? Do you support it? Like they do when the president says something. Remember when he said these two should go back where they came from? You remember the uproar, but yet these two can say what they say, and we get nothing. We get crickets from the media in terms of these irresponsible statements. But it's more than irresponsible. Like I said, they're disgusting and vile.
Mm-hmm. Well, it is just it is amazing to me that Chuck Schumer, not a peep out of him. And I don't really know if the leadership of the Democratic Party is afraid of the squad, if they're afraid of their social media, but the fact that they're not condemning them. And the president's right. He said these are now the face of the Democratic Party. He put out a tweet. He said, deal with it. I mean, this is your face. This is what they stand for. Obviously, the leadership of the party is fine with them doing what they're doing. So, look, this debate is going to continue on. But I said this yesterday, Sheriff. I never in my lifetime did I think that I would tune into a press conference where two United States congressional representatives got up on stage and basically called for the financial abolition of the state of Israel and to divide it into two states, and then get away with it. I just never thought that I would see that happen, but it happened right in front of your eyes, and nobody said a word. Meantime, the Republicans are backing primary opponents against Steve King in Iowa for saying dumb things. So that's really the difference, right? I mean, Steve King says something dumb, and they're trying to get him out. They censor him. They throw him off committees, and now they're trying to oust him. These people say the craziest things on a daily basis, and they're embraced by the Democratic leadership. It's a strange world.
They also,
Sheriff.
They try to make the GOP and the entire Republican establishment, including the voters and conservative voters. And those are two separate things, by the way, but they try to make them own that stuff. Steve King, he's a friend. Steve King is just inartful in the way that he presents stuff. He's not a great orator. He's very clumsy in some of the things that he says, but I know it's in his heart. He's a good man, but he just, sometimes he has this tendency to step in it, so to speak, because he's not real artful when it comes to interviews and discussions and debates. But like you just said, then when he says something clumsy, the entire, right has to own it according to the left and according to CNN and MSNBC and the New York Times and Washington Post. They say this is what all conservatives are. This is what all Republicans are, so on and so forth. So, yeah, the rules are different. We know that. And, for people to sit up and whine about it isn't going to change anything. You got to fight back. And that's why I support what the president says. I support how he says it. And it was time that somebody called out, because I do it when it comes to black voting. I call them out. I go, why are you voting Democrat? The Democrats have done nothing for you. They take your vote for granted. Well, that's really what the president said yesterday. So if I'm going to say it as it relates to black voters, I have to support him when he said it as it relates to Jewish voters. It's a good question.
Yeah, and I think
why do they?
I think it was straight up. She was straight up. He said after this press conference, I mean, how do you keep voting for Democrats if you're a Jewish person and you believe in the state of Israel? Like, how do you do it? Just explain it to me, because either you're you're ill-informed or you're not seeing this clearly. I think he called them out. All right, let's get to baseball. Cubs won 3 in a row. Now they're at home. They're only a half game out of first place behind the Cardinals. So different baseball team at home. How do you figure that?
Yeah, I don't know, night and day. If they just played 500 on the road, they'd have a 10-game lead in the NL Central. But the Cardinals are surging right now. The Cardinals worry me. They just won 2 in a row against the Brewers. But those teams play, I think in the last 2 weeks of the season, the Cubs and the Cardinals played 7 times in the last 10 days of the season, a 3-game series in Chicago at Wrigley and then a 4-game to end the season. John, to end the season, a 4-game road trip in St. Louis. That's why I said I'm real worried about the Cardinals.
Well, sure, that could determine it, right? I mean, you go in there tied, you go to St. Louis, things are not going to go in your favor based on the Cubs' inability, just total inability to win on the road. But then they get home. I mean, it's a different team. They won 3 straight. They're a half game out. We'll see what plays out. I still think the Cardinals are smoke and mirrors. I still like the Cubs in that division, and we'll see what plays out. Sheriff, we're out of time. Thank you for being with us. Go to americasheriff.com, John Fredericks Radio Network.